But whenever he worked alone.
Yeah.
He never had to work with anyone else, even though he was always with his brothers. He did his stuff alone.
On television, Fred and Ethel Mertz were America's favorite neighbors. They bickered and joked with each other in ways that made millions of viewers laugh. But the real story behind I Love Lucy was very different. The two actors who played Fred and Ethel, William Frawley and Vivian Vance, actually hated each other in real life. Their hatred was so strong that it nearly destroyed one of television's most beloved shows. Before they became famous as the Mertzes, William Frawley and Vivian Vance came from completely different backgrounds. These different lives would eventually lead to one of Hollywood's most famous behind-the-scenes fights. William Frawley was already an old hand in show business when I Love Lucy started. Born in 1887, he had spent many years performing in traveling shows, on Broadway, and in movies. He usually played grumpy, working-class characters. His sense of humor was sharp but rough, and everyone in Hollywood knew he had problems with drinking. When Daisy Arnaz offered him the job playing Fred Mertz, Frawley was almost 65 years old. His movie career was mostly over, and he saw this TV show as his last chance to have a steady job and income. Vivian Vance was very different. She was younger, more refined, and had just come from years of success on stage. She had trained in serious theater and was known for being versatile and having great comedic timing. When the show was being cast, she was in her early 40s, making her 22 years younger than Frawley. When she found out that this much older man would play her husband on the show, she was reportedly disgusted. She supposedly said that no one would believe she was married to someone so much older and looking like that. This cruel comment was something Frawley never forgot. He may have been old-fashioned, but he had his pride, and Vivian's insult hurt him deeply. Their problems started before they ever filmed a single scene together. Frawley was furious that his TV wife had openly made fun of his age and appearance. He carried this anger with him and treated her with suspicion and dislike from the very beginning. He saw her as stuck-up, snobbish, and disrespectful. Vance, on the other hand, saw Frawley as a washed-up alcoholic who was just trying to hold on to his last paycheck. Their bad relationship was set in stone before the cameras ever started rolling, and there was no way to fix it. The TV network had hoped the two actors would have natural chemistry on screen. Instead, they got raw hostility that was barely hidden behind professional behavior. Somehow, this real tension actually worked on television. It came across as lovable married couple bickering. Audiences loved Fred and Ethel's sarcastic jokes and playful arguments, never knowing about the real hatred underneath. Frawley and Vance may have despised each other, but they understood their jobs and performed well every time the cameras were on. However, behind all the applause and laughter, their first clash would become the foundation of a feud that only got worse over time. William Frawley's reputation for being difficult didn't start with I Love Lucy. Long before he ever worked on the sitcom, Frawley was known throughout Hollywood as a heavy drinker with a bad temper. His drinking problems had cost him jobs in the past, and Daisy Arnaz knew the risks when he hired him to play Fred Mertz. Arnaz had only one rule for Frawley. If he ever showed up to work drunk, he would be fired immediately. Surprisingly, Frawley followed this rule, but even when sober, he could be hard to work with. Vivian Vance came from the world of live theater, where being professional and on time was absolutely required. She took pride in being prepared and disciplined. She found Frawley's rough behavior annoying from the start. While he thought she was uptight and acted superior to everyone, she saw him as lazy and crude. The difference in how they approached their work made their relationship even worse, and it showed in almost every interaction they had. One of the earliest and most damaging incidents happened when Vance reportedly tried to get the producers to hire a younger actor to play her husband instead. She complained that Frawley looked more like her grandfather than her husband, and even suggested that their age difference was making the show less believable. While it was never confirmed whether these complaints reached the network executives, word certainly got back to Frawley, and he was absolutely furious. From that point on, their relationship on set became a quiet war. They would roll their eyes at each other, make sarcastic comments, and give each other icy stares. Frawley would mutter insults under his breath, while Vance would laugh a little too hard when he made mistakes. The tension was so thick that even the crew members noticed it, and it often made rehearsals uncomfortable for everyone involved. Yet somehow, when it came time to film the actual show, they both became complete professionals, locking into their characters and hiding their contempt with convincing chemistry. Desi Arnaz, who was both the show's producer and co-star, found himself in a very difficult position. He respected Frawley and admired his old-school Hollywood timing, but he also recognized that Vance was critical to the show's success. Rather than trying to fix their relationship, he managed them carefully. He made sure they didn't have unnecessary rehearsals together, never seated them next to each other at events, and kept their scenes efficient and focused. Arnaz knew they would never be friends. His only goal was to keep the peace just long enough to get each scene filmed. Despite all her frustration, Vance never allowed herself to complain publicly. She kept her complaints to private conversations with close friends and confidants, but the cracks in their relationship were always visible to those who worked closely with them. One makeup artist later recalled how Vance would finish a scene with Frawley, storm off the set, and whisper, "I deserve an Emmy just for putting up with him." Frawley, on the other hand, would loudly refer to her using crude names between takes, completely unconcerned with who might overhear him. Still, neither actor quit the show. As much as they hated each other, they both knew that I Love Lucy was a huge hit, and the money was too good to give up. So the fake friendship continued, episode after episode, season after season. But underneath all the laughs, their bitterness kept growing stronger. On screen, Fred and Ethel Mertz were a comedy dream team. They were sarcastic, playful, and oddly affectionate with each other. But behind the camera, William Frawley and Vivian Vance could barely stand to be in the same room. That warm chemistry that fans loved was completely fake, held together only by their professionalism and an unspoken agreement to get through each scene and then get as far away from each other as possible. Filming scenes with both of them became a carefully controlled operation. Directors learned that they had to limit rehearsal time and shoot quickly to avoid confrontations. Frawley and Vance rarely talked to each other when the cameras weren't rolling and never rehearsed together more than absolutely necessary. Scenes with just the two of them were filmed fast, without room for improvisation or extra takes. Neither wanted to spend even one extra second in the other's presence. The crew members could feel the tension constantly. Even after successfully completing a scene, the two actors would walk off in opposite directions without saying a word to each other. The entire set would go quiet and uncomfortable. At one point, a visiting director joked that Fred and Ethel got along better than the actors who played them, but nobody laughed because it was too close to the truth. The hostility affected every aspect of production. Vance made sure to avoid sitting near Frawley during table reads where the cast would go through the script together. He, in turn, would insult her voice and acting delivery loud enough for her to hear. When Vance was once asked to act sweet toward Frawley's character in a scene, she reportedly asked, "Do we really expect people to buy this?" Frawley, overhearing her comment, fired back, "They've bought worse from you." Despite all this constant strain, television viewers never picked up on the feud. Their timing, delivery, and banter made Fred and Ethel one of the highlights of the show. Fans believed their connection was real, which only frustrated Vance more. She felt like she was carrying their scenes while Frawley got credit for their chemistry. Frawley, meanwhile, believed she was trying to upstage him and make him look bad. This only made their resentment grow deeper. There were moments when their anger boiled over completely. Planning sessions for blocking out their movements during scenes sometimes turned into shouting matches, with accusations of scene stealing and laziness flying back and forth. Desi Arnaz had to personally step in and remind them that their jobs depended on putting the show's success first. Somehow, they always managed to pull it together when it mattered. Their ability to perform well under such pressure was truly remarkable. Even though the feud was wearing them both down, neither let it affect what audiences saw on their television screens. But maintaining this level of professionalism came at a serious cost. Pretending to care for someone they truly loathed took a heavy emotional toll on both of them. The tension was always there, simmering just below the surface, even though the audience never saw it. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were not just the stars of I Love Lucy, they were also the driving force behind it. As producers and creators of the show, they had to deal with the constant pressure of keeping the show running smoothly, which included managing the ongoing tension between William Frawley and Vivian Vance. It was a delicate balancing act that tested even their control over television's most successful show. Desi Arnaz saw William Frawley as a reliable professional, despite his reputation for drinking. Frawley showed up on time, knew all his lines, and hit every mark the directors gave him. Arnaz admired these qualities, and even when CBS executives pressured him about Frawley's reputation, he defended the older actor. But he maintained his one strict rule. If Frawley ever came to work drunk, he would be fired immediately. Frawley never broke that rule. Lucille Ball, meanwhile, was much closer to Vivian Vance. The two women developed a genuine friendship early on and stayed close throughout the show's run. Ball respected Vance's theater background and depended on her comedic instincts to bring emotional depth to their scenes together. While Ball remained outwardly neutral during disputes between her co-stars, her sympathies clearly leaned toward Vance. Still, she remained publicly supportive of Frawley, knowing that the show's success depended on everyone doing their job well. Managing the feud required constant adjustments behind the scenes. Scenes between Fred and Ethel were written carefully to avoid unnecessary physical closeness or intimate moments. Directors learned to limit rehearsals between the two actors, knowing that spending too much time together only invited more drama. Even scenes that required affectionate moments between their characters had to be filmed quickly, with minimal interaction outside of what was absolutely needed for the cameras. Behind closed doors, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz took on the role of silent refer, Miami Ice. Studio executives were aware of the friction between Frawley and Vance, but the couple worked hard to keep the press from finding out about it. There were no interviews discussing the feud, and no backstage gossip was allowed to leak to reporters. I Love Lucy was too valuable and successful to let personal conflicts damage its wholesome image. Despite everything that was going on, Desi Arnaz never seriously considered replacing either actor. He once joked that the day Fred and Ethel actually got along in real life would be the end of the show's success. That joke was closer to the truth than most people realized. The actors' real-life dislike actually mirrored their on-screen dynamic perfectly: grumpy, sarcastic, and only occasionally affectionate. It was a case of art imitating life, but with all the real bitterness carefully filtered out for the television audience. One telling story came from a celebratory dinner held for one of the show's milestone episodes. Frawley and Vance arrived at the restaurant separately, spent the entire evening avoiding speaking to each other, and reportedly rolled their eyes when someone made a toast in their honor. It was a small but clear sign that their feud was permanent, no matter how well they performed together on screen. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz managed to hold everything together for as long as they could, but even they couldn't prevent what happened next. When CBS offered Fred and Ethel their own spin-off show, it pushed their hatred past the point of no return. By the mid-1950s, I Love Lucy had become a cultural phenomenon. Its ratings were higher than any other show on television, its stars were beloved across America, and its supporting characters, Fred and Ethel Mertz, had developed their own devoted fan base. So when CBS suggested creating a spin-off show starring just the Mertzes, network executives thought it would be an automatic success. But behind the scenes, this proposal lit a fuse that blew their feud wide open. CBS executives believed that Fred and Ethel could easily carry their own sitcom. They envisioned storylines centered around the couple's marriage, their various misadventures, and maybe even interactions with a new set of neighbors. The pitch was ambitious. Executives were reportedly very enthusiastic about it, and William Frawley jumped at the opportunity immediately. For him, it meant more money, more time in the spotlight, and a chance to prove he was more than just a supporting player on someone else's show. He was completely on board with the idea, until he learned who was not interested. Vivian Vance refused the offer flat out. According to multiple sources who were there at the time, Vance didn't even consider the proposal seriously. The thought of working with Frawley on a show where they would be the main focus was, in her own words, unbearable. She made it crystal clear that she would never agree to any project that forced her into even more scenes with a man she actively despised. Whether she was afraid of being typecast in similar roles for the rest of her career, or simply couldn't stomach spending more time with Frawley, her answer was an absolute no. Frawley was absolutely furious when he learned of her refusal. He had already begun planning and dreaming about the show's potential success. In his mind, Vance was sabotaging both of their futures out of pure spite. He accused her of being selfish, unprofessional, and arrogant. Their already icy relationship turned completely venomous after this incident. From that point on, even basic politeness disappeared completely. Vance stopped trying to hide her contempt for Frawley. She would openly show her disgust when he was around, and she no longer made any effort to be civil. Frawley, in response, doubled down on his insults, calling her names behind her back and sometimes directly to her face. The atmosphere on set became toxic for everyone involved. The fallout was immediate and devastating. The proposed spin-off was dead before it ever had a real chance to get started. CBS executives backed away from the project entirely when they realized one of the two main stars would never participate. Lucy and Desi, who were reportedly relieved to avoid dealing with even more drama between their co-stars, chose not to push the issue or try to change Vance's mind. For Vance and Frawley, the failed spin-off offer marked a major turning point in their relationship. There would be no reconciliation after this, no middle ground, and absolutely no future collaboration between them. If there had ever been even the smallest chance of them working out their differences, it ended the moment she turned down that show. The irony of the situation was particularly cruel. Television audiences thought Fred and Ethel were inseparable as a couple. In reality, one of the actors was willing to walk away from fame and fortune just to avoid working more closely with the other. Their bitterness had gone far beyond simple dislike or professional disagreement. It had become something that would define both of their careers for the rest of their lives. And yet, despite all of this drama happening behind the scenes, none of it was visible to the public. The studio had one overriding goal: keep the feud completely buried and hidden from fans and the media. To television audiences across America, Fred and Ethel Mertz were pure comedy gold. They seemed relatable, dependable, and effortlessly funny together. Their chemistry appeared so natural and believable that most viewers simply assumed William Frawley and Vivian Vance must have the same kind of camaraderie when the cameras weren't rolling. But behind that convincing illusion was a carefully maintained fake facade, orchestrated by publicists and producers who worked extremely hard to hide the truth from everyone. These two actors deeply despised each other. In the 1950s, Hollywood image management was absolutely everything. Major studios had entire departments devoted entirely to keeping scandals and negative stories out of the press. Any signs of tension or conflict between cast members were quickly buried under cheerful press releases, lighthearted interviews, and perfectly posed promotional photographs. Vance and Frawley played along with this charade when they had to. At public events and award shows, they would smile on cue for photographers. During interviews with reporters, they answered questions diplomatically and professionally. But the moment the cameras stopped flashing and the reporters left, they would avoid each other completely, as if the other person didn't exist. Vivian Vance, shaped by her disciplined theater background, understood better than most that complaining publicly would be career suicide. She kept her grievances and frustrations to private conversations with close friends, but she never let any of her complaints reach the public. She was well aware that one wrong word to the wrong reporter could cost her future roles and destroy her reputation in the industry. William Frawley, though he was more outspoken in private settings, also understood the unwritten rules of Hollywood. He knew never to let the public know what was really happening behind the scenes. Still, he made his true feelings very clear to people who worked on the set with them. He would regularly mock Vance's voice, her appearance, and even her acting abilities. Crew members later recalled hearing him mutter cruel insults under his breath while watching her rehearse scenes. The studio executives, who were well aware of the animosity between their two actors, made quiet but important adjustments to keep the peace and maintain the illusion. Promotional tours were carefully planned so that Frawley and Vance rarely had to travel together. At award shows and industry events, they were deliberately seated far apart from each other. Even during group interviews with the entire cast, Lucy and Desi were strategically positioned between the two feuding actors to serve as buffers. When whispers or rumors about their conflict occasionally surfaced in Hollywood circles, they were quickly shut down by studio publicists or dismissed as harmless jokes between friends. The official line was always that any apparent tension was just part of their characters' relationship dynamic. And somehow, despite all this behind-the-scenes friction and carefully orchestrated damage control, the show itself never suffered in quality. Week after week, viewers across the country watched Fred and Ethel laugh together, argue playfully, and support each other as if absolutely nothing was wrong between them. Their performances were completely seamless, making the real tension invisible to the audience at home. This is what makes their story so fascinating and almost unbelievable. Everything that people loved about Fred and Ethel as characters was built entirely on two people who were essentially faking it with everything they had. It wasn't genuine affection or friendship that kept their scenes sharp and funny. It was pure professionalism and a shared commitment to the show's success that made them put aside their personal hatred when the cameras rolled. And they pulled off this deception so convincingly that even decades later, many longtime fans of the show still find it hard to believe the truth about what was really happening. But this carefully maintained illusion only lasted as long as the cameras were rolling and the show was on the air. Off-screen, the divide between them never healed, not even slightly. And once I Love Lucy finally ended its run, the mask came off completely, and their true feelings became much more obvious to anyone paying attention. When I Love Lucy came to an end, William Frawley and Vivian Vance finally got what they had both longed for throughout the entire run of the show: complete distance from each other. They no longer had to pretend to get along, even for professional reasons. But time and distance did not heal their wounds or soften their hatred in any way. If anything, their resentment only became harder and more bitter with age, eventually spilling over into later interviews and public statements that left no doubt that their mutual hatred had survived long past the final episode. Frawley was the first of the two to speak publicly about their relationship, and when he did, he was never kind or diplomatic. Whenever reporters asked him about working with Vance, he never missed an opportunity to insult her, calling her ungrateful, impossible to work with, and worse. He would often joke darkly that if she died before he did, he would send flowers to her funeral, but only to celebrate. The scary thing was that people who knew him well believed he actually meant it. His bitterness toward her wasn't just an act or an exaggeration for effect. It was deeply personal and completely genuine. For Frawley, Vance hadn't just insulted his appearance and age all those years ago. In his mind, she had ruined what could have been the biggest opportunity of his later career by refusing to do the spin-off show with him. He never forgave her for that, and he carried that anger with him for the rest of his life. Vance, for her part, was only slightly more diplomatic in public, but she made no real secret of her contempt for her former co-star. In interviews during her later years, she often refused to speak Frawley's name out loud, referring to him only as "that man," or "my so-called husband" from the show. In one moment of particularly brutal honesty with a reporter, she said that working with Frawley had been the absolute hardest part of her entire career. When Frawley died in 1966, Vance's reaction was telling. According to people who knew her well, she reportedly celebrated his death with champagne, whether tears. His story is completely true or partly exaggerated. It was certainly consistent with how people who worked with both actors remembered her feelings toward him. There was never any reconciliation between them, no late-in-life phone call to make peace, and no private truce that healed their wounds. Their feud remained completely untouched and unresolved, preserved in its original bitterness just like the television episodes they had once filmed together. While Lucille Ball managed to stay close friends with both actors individually after the show ended, even she could never get them in the same room together again. The roots of their animosity had grown too deep to ever be pulled up. What makes their story even more striking is how differently the two were remembered by the public after they died. Frawley died in 1966, well before the era of television reboots, retrospective documentaries, and sitcom nostalgia that would come later. Vance, however, lived until 1979, long enough to see I Love Lucy become firmly cemented as a cultural icon and classic of American television. She gave several interviews during her later years, often speaking fondly about her memories of working with Lucille Ball and the show's success, but never, ever about Fred Mertz or William Frawley. Through these interviews, she made sure that history would remember who she believed the real problem had been. In the end, their memorable performances lived on and continued to entertain new generations, while the people behind those characters drifted apart completely and permanently. Their final years confirmed what industry insiders had known all along throughout the show's run. The laughs and affection that audiences saw were carefully scripted and rehearsed, but the hatred between the actors was completely real and never went away. Even now, long after both William Frawley and Vivian Vance have died, fans of I Love Lucy are still learning the shocking truth behind all that laughter and discovering that their favorite television neighbors couldn't stand. each other in real life. Decades after I Love Lucy ended its original run, the show remains a beloved classic that is still watched, quoted, and adored by new generations of fans around the world. Fred and Ethel Mertz continue to make audiences laugh with their sarcastic banter and their oddball affection for each other, their performances frozen in time on film and video. But knowing the real truth about what was happening behind the scenes changes everything about how we watch these episodes. What once looked like innocent, playful teasing between married neighbors now feels like barely concealed hostility. The sideways glances they give each other, the flat tones in their voices during certain lines, even the moments of awkward silence between their dialogue. Suddenly, these things don't feel like acting anymore. They feel like glimpses of the real relationship between two people who genuinely couldn't stand each other. And that realization is what makes this story so compelling and unforgettable. The performances that Fred and Ethel gave were absolutely brilliant and entertaining, but they were fueled by something very real and very dark. Mutual resentment and hatred that was buried just below the surface of every scene they shared. Vivian Vance and William Frawley proved that even the most toxic and poisonous working relationship can somehow produce television magic when the cameras are rolling and professionalism takes over. But creating that magic came at a serious personal cost to both of them. Neither actor ever softened their position toward the other, not even slightly. Neither ever tried to repair what had been broken between them from the very beginning. They gave the world unforgettable television entertainment while privately nursing grudges and hatred that never died or even faded with time. Today, when fans rewatch I Love Lucy with this knowledge, they see the show with completely new eyes. They still laugh at Fred and Ethel's antics and enjoy their comedic timing. But now many viewers also find themselves wondering what it must have been like for these two actors to deliver those lines while secretly despising the person standing just inches away from them. It adds a new layer to every scene they shared together, a layer that is darker, more complex, and impossible to ignore once you know the truth. This was much more than just a simple workplace disagreement or a professional feud. It was a battle between two people who were hiding their true feelings in plain sight, performing their hatred as love for an audience who never knew what they were really watching. Because behind every laugh that Fred and Ethel generated, there was a lie that Frawley and Vance were telling, not just to their audience, but to themselves as well.